I'm not.
Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you at PTB World with, of course, Farrukh Batafi and Raja Faisal, our analysts in the show as always. We're also, of course, going to be focusing on various topics with other guests, and I'll introduce them as we continue. But before that, what we're going to talk about today focuses on the political developments in the country, especially with regards to the caretaker setup after the National Assembly stands dissolved. And it's important, of course, in terms of the kind of deliberations that have been going on for quite some time now, and we know that the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition have met, and they have spoken about with regards to who it is going to be, who's going to lead the caretaker setup, and they have 3 days to decide that. And if they can't do that, then it's going to go to the parliamentary committee, and if not, then the ECP will be taking the decision in its own hands. It's extremely important in terms of the kind of challenges politically and economically that the country will have to face in the next few months, and also in terms of the challenges then, of course, that will be countered by the caretaker setup. And then, of course, the ECP is also tasked with the a very big measure of finding new delimitations, and then, of course, with reference to the conduct of the new general elections based on the census of the new census. And this is important, especially in terms of the way that this will cause an eventual delay in the general elections that were earlier scheduled to be held later this year, and from a 90-day period from the dissolution of the assemblies. But moving forward, of course, we understand that this can possibly be led to March 2024, a timeline that has been given by the previous ruling elite. And it's important also in terms of whether or not that will be something that is a certainty, because of course there's a lot of question marks and a lot of moving parts involved in the way that the political dynamics are going to move ahead. We're going to be taking a look at all of that, and then also with reference to the kind of names that have been springing up and the kind of reports that have been coming in. Officially, we haven't really heard anybody commenting on the names that have been proposed either by the opposition or the previous ruling elite, but also in terms of whoever it is that is going to be, what sort of factors are being taken into account, and whether or not this decision is going to be taken as part of the consensus between a leader of the opposition and now the acting Prime Minister. So we're going to be taking a look at all of this scenario and trying to understand what's going on right now and the kind of implications, of course, this holds with reference to how we move ahead. Of course, Farrukh and Raja Faisal are going to be with us throughout the show, and we've also been joined online by Khurram Shahzad, who's a senior journalist, and Rana Makbool Saab, the Senator PMLN. Thank you very much for joining us and being part of the discussion. We're going to be, of course, talking more in detail with reference to what is going on. But Farrukh, when we talk about the way that the country stands today, of course, it's important that the democratic process is being upheld, and the way that the PMLN, the government talked about the way that they wanted to proceed with it is something that they actually saw through, and we stand here today with a process that is moving forward in the right direction. Is that enough cause to celebrate?
Right, Sana. I don't know whether it is premature to celebrate anything or not. We still have to wait and see what actually becomes of the whole process. But there are 2 or 3 things which are important. One, the Prime Minister spent, or acting Prime Minister for that matter, officiating Prime Minister for that matter, spent a busy day today bidding farewell to most of the people he has worked with. Then he also gave an interview in which he has actually in detail talked about challenges that they faced and the way they actually managed those. So I think that you can safely say that with the kind of complicated background this government actually came to power, the Prime Minister's role is something that should make him proud, because we kept on hearing about the possibility of default. We kept on hearing about, we endured things like May 9th in this country at a time when we thought that there could something could go awry. Those things actually did not go awry. So I think that in the end, this government should be proud of its, particularly regarding crisis management portfolio. They have done a lot. Now, let us talk about 2 other things. Right now, I call the Prime Minister officiating Prime Minister, because as per the Constitution, he is going to stay in office till the time his successor is appointed. So media has gone crazy about the possibility of who's going to actually become the next caretaker prime minister. But why is it taking so much time? And that was fascinating because today we saw Raja Riaz finally, the opposition leader, finally meeting prime minister and volunteering a couple of names. But I was thinking, why would he actually say that we still have to meet tomorrow and we still have to wait and see what becomes of it?
But they do have 3 days, don't they?
They do have 3 days, of course, but it is not compulsory that you have to essentially exhaust those 3 days, or for that matter, those 8 days that will take the entire system to come up with a name. So why is it so? I thought that the prime minister always has the capacity to become prime minister again if his party is returned to power. But Raja Riaz Saab is enjoying limelight in a post that will never come back to him. So I think that it becomes quite evident that he must be enjoying that moment and he must be savoring it so much that as much attention can be given to him, he will actually keep on wielding that power. But eventually, of course, when we come back to the issue of names that are circling, we will talk about what exactly is going on. But right now, I think this is the main cause of delay. There could be another that tomorrow is 11th of August, right? The momentous speech that was given by Qaid Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah on the importance of religion not being political issue in this country. And then, of course, we are nearing 14th August. So there could be some realization that a caretaker setup should take over on one of these dates.
Okay.
So that can also be there.
Okay, and Farooq, I remember you once talking about when we used to speak about the resolution of the assembly, that why leave before you have to, why leave even one day before you have to. Wouldn't the same sort of principle apply here in terms of the consensus, why earlier than they have to?
Right. First of all, the assembly has actually left before it had to.
Sure,
and
but
by,
in terms of the margin that they had,
you know, the whole point is that if you are going to have a caretaker setup or with some extended period, why actually have any kind of tarnish because of that? I think so. It is better to actually distance yourself from the governance issue as quickly as possible. And this moment, Sana, is also interesting in another aspect. Yesterday, when the assembly actually was dissolved, simultaneously the federal cabinet was dissolved also. You must be actually moving around in the city, in the country. Tell me, did you feel any difference?
No.
So what actually does that entail? That all those ministers, even if they are not heading a department, departments continue. Where does it lead you? It actually brings you back to my original point, that it is the bureaucracy that runs a country, but bureaucracy is like an ocean that you cannot do away with. What you can do is you can navigate through and take it in a direction. So that is what is happening. But the whole point is why expose the weakness of politicians, that even if they are not there, system continues on autopilot.
But you have been exposing that. But let's also talk to Rana Saab about it. And Rana Saab, welcome to the show. And I want to speak about, of course, what we were earlier discussing in terms of why there hasn't been a consensus so far. I understand that there is still time, but should you have reached this before, whether there is a direction that is moving towards that particular stance? And also your comments on what Farooq earlier talked about, especially in terms of the kind of absence and the kind of impact that it has or none in terms of where we stand today.
And thank you, Sana, and thank you, Patapi Sahib. Though your voice is not clearly audible, but I try to understand what you wanted to say. I agree with Patapi Sahib on this issue that let Raja Sahib have a wonderful time for another 2 days, because this is a lifetime experience for him. The Prime Minister had been in many important offices and he enjoyed the position. But Raja Sahib is, for the first time in his life, is at this pivotal position. He is at liberty to disagree with the proposals of the Prime Minister, and he can show his dissent very strongly to the offers of Prime Minister. So let him enjoy that. It's a particularly very interesting situation for him. But somehow that, if not today, by tomorrow, it has to be decided because this issue will not be sent over to the parliamentary committee or to the election commission or to Supreme Court because there is a lot of consensus between the opposition of yesterday and the government of yesterday. And they are, I personally think, they know each other and they have adopted the same policy vis-a-vis running the government. And therefore, I think there is no scope for any difference of opinion. And we just pray to God that we get a man, a prime minister, who really deserves it. And we may not falter in selection of a man who will be able to deliver for the coming 4 or 5 months because it's a very critical period. Unfortunately, this provision in our constitution is perhaps totally contrary to the real vision, the original vision of Westminster democracy, because it doesn't fit in. Because in the carrying out a policy, the basic spirit has to be spirit of continuity and predictability. It causes break in the system, and generally it's not very helpful. But somehow or other, due to the ethical and moral degeneration in our country, unfortunately, there's a lot of people are skeptical for each other. They don't trust each other. Politicians don't trust each other. Anywhere in the Commonwealth countries, there is no system of caretakers like India and other countries. Elections are held by the election commission, and there the election commissions are very strong. And rather, they are impregnable, and they cannot be influenced by any government. And governments don't also try to influence the election commission. But somehow we're not very lucky to have that system. And I personally think next time, inshallah, if God gives me the opportunity and my friends, we'll move the amendment in the Constitution. We should revert back to the original system, and the spirit of continuity should be saved and preserved, because that's the lifeline of progress and development of any economy or any polity in the world.
Rana Saab, it's always a privilege to have you in our show, and you're very right about it that the 72 hours of limelight, and earlier obviously Farrukh highlighted it as well, we should never be snatching it away from our own very own Raja Saab. And of course, this time around, he is quite serious thinking about this matter of interim setup, interim prime minister as well. Because I was going through one of his statements in which he said that this time around, we will never accept obviously an interim prime minister coming from the outside of the country, a foreign interim prime minister. He will not be going for that. And secondly, he did highlight that the priority is to bring somebody who can take care of the economy for the future as well, because the parliament took care of it for almost a year and a half. So would you agree with this statement from Raja Saab that it should not be coming from outside? Somebody from within Pakistan should be being the prime minister, interim prime minister.
Which Raja Sahab? Raja Faisal or Raja Riaz?
Raja Riaz.
Right, and Rana Saab, also comment on whether or not you think that within these 72 hours you can actually hope for a consensus, and that this matter will not go eventually to the parliamentary committee.
Yes, I really salute all Rajas. May it be Raja Pervez, the speaker, may it be Raja, the opposition leader, and may it be Raja Faisal. They are all people of wonderful, sterling qualities, and I really appreciate and admire their capability. Raja, you are absolutely correct. This is the correct approach, not to invite anybody from outside. We should try to use the indigenous and throw up the indigenous talent, if at all we have. And I think Raja Saab has been able to search some personality who will be answering all these questions with his capability and with his genius to handle things properly, especially the economy, which has become a nightmare for the people at large in the country. So that's a correct decision and a correct approach.
Right, and Khurram Saab, my question to you with reference to what we were discussing earlier also in terms of this timeline, I want to know, of course, that there is that provision. Rana Saab, I'll come back to you, but let us also bring Khurram Shahzad in discussion. Khurram Saab, when we take a look at the situation at the moment, of course, one has to hope for a smooth process and a smooth transition forward, and that's important. But I want to know whether or not there is absolute confidence in the way that things are moving forward, that there will actually be a name coming up soon within the timeline between the two sides, or that the matter will then go to the parliamentary committee and eventually the ECP, and that even so, when that happens, we will have a caretaker set up that will be able to take on with full credibility and full powers without any of the parties having any sort of reservations against it.
Well, Sana, thank you very much for inviting me. First of all, I would like...
me?
Rana Saab, I'll come back to you. I'm asking Khurram Saab this question.
Khurram, go ahead.
Okay, yes. Thank you very much.
Yes, as we assess the situation at this moment, we should not forget that we are talking about an opposition leader, which is an aspirant to contest elections from PMLN ticket in the upcoming election. So the person who will be going to contest elections under the leadership of Mr. Shehbaz Sharif, who is right now Prime Minister. So how can that opposition leader defy this Prime Minister at this stage? So I personally think that this candidate, the candidate for the caretaker Prime Minister, will be selected by these two gentlemen, most probably tomorrow, and if not tomorrow, by day after tomorrow. So, and I believe that they are already agreed on somebody, and they are not going to announce it any soon, but they will announce it at a proper time, which they have already decided at what time they should announce it. So most probably by tomorrow evening or day after tomorrow, they will be announcing it. I may be wrong, but if you go by the perceptions, if you go by the track record, like during the last previous 15 months, where did you see the opposition leader protesting any government policy? So he has been unison with the government. He never ever protested on anything.
Right, but Khurram, when you say they may already have a name, who do you think it is?
I mean, there are several names. We should not make guessing games, but as we discussed this, we know that there is a person in the capital who has met Chief of the Military Staff like 2 weeks back. There were reports that he was meeting Prime Minister yesterday, and his very, very close friends have tweeted congratulating him. Actually, I spoke to a couple of his friends who confirmed to me that they congratulated him, and he accepted the congratulations. But as the government is not, announcing any name, so I think we should not go to these guessing games. We should not speculate about any name. I mean, this is Pakistan, and we have seen in the past that things change at the 11th hour. So until the government announces it, I think we should not go to guess. But what I can say surely is that there would not be any difference between the government and between the opposition on the appointment of the caretaker Prime Minister.
Right, absolutely. Faisal, of course, you have been praised quite a lot because of your surname and its importance, especially in terms of what we're discussing today, and whether or not you will find it in yourself to actually go ahead and take a shot at this guessing game and let us know who you think it is and what possibly can be the name moving forward.
And please don't volunteer.
Yeah, well,
yourself for the job.
I'm not pretty much sure about whom Khurram was referring to, but one name I am, hearing the echoes about is, in Pakistan, obviously, we never had a precedent that some retired general became the interim Prime Minister. So this time around, we are hearing another name. And of course, earlier we were talking about Raja Riaz, and of course, in my name, Raja comes. In his name, we have a guest here. His name starts with Rana, and he has in his name Rana as well. I'm talking about General Raheel Sharif Rana, retired. He is being echoed as well because I think he's able enough, and people still love him. and he is someone who's considered as having no political sides, and he's someone who overall Pakistanis, they love him, and I think it would be quite a suitable name as well. And I think further about him, we can of course ask Rana Saab as well. Rana Saab can shed some light over it, the whether if his name gets echoed, would he be accepted in coming days for being interim Prime Minister?
Sure, and Rana Saab, I'll come back to you, but before that, Farooq, hypothetically, not just particularly this name, but if we talk about any sort of retired general taking up this position, do you think that's a good idea?
Well, I don't know why not. Let me very simply say that my belief is that when an officer actually retires, he is a civilian. So after that, they can always go for any job. But remember, when you create precedents, there were precedents. For example, Ayub Khan, while he was in his uniform, was made the defense minister of the country. So we saw how that formula went and what exactly that did to the system. But having said that, let me tell you, in Pakistan, everyone is polarized. Opinion is polarized about everyone, right? I think when Khurram was talking about, he was talking about Jalil Abbas Jilani, because he was the one who was reportedly said to have met both these leaders that he mentioned. But that I can be wrong. Usually what happens, Sana, is that whenever you are looking for a perfect candidate, you keep on actually vetting people. You ask a long slate of people's names to be vetted, right? That also included Rahil Sharif, by the way, and he was vetted twice for this consideration. But that doesn't automatically qualify him or make him the leading candidate for the post. I understand why this concern might be interesting, because or his nomination might be interesting. In coming days, what we are hearing is we are going to see a lot of investment from the Arab world, right? So they have to have somebody that they can feel comfortable with. He is a Pakistani leader who has, in the war on terror, actually made his mark. And after that also, he was trusted by the Arabs as well, because he kept on actually leading their army. So there is always this, and by the way, he is a Pakistani, right? So there is always the possibility. But since then, many other names have sprung up. For example, Raja Riaz today actually mentioned Sadiq Sanjarani. And I thought immediately somebody asked me, what do you think of this proposal? I think Raja Riaz and Sadiq Sanjarani actually don't get along, because he wants him to be disqualified for next 5 years. Once you are actually caretaker, set up caretaker Prime Minister, you and your family members, that include your children, your spouse as well, cannot participate in elections for some time. So after serving out this stint, he will be sitting out of the system. Right now he is the chairman of Senate, which automatically is deputy president. The moment president steps aside, it is the chairman's position to actually officiate on his behalf. So I was really laughing at this. Regarding Rahil Sharif, I know that there are many people who keep on, associating various political positions to him. But I think that he is one of those generals that I felt very grateful to, especially in the war on terror, especially when APS Peshawar took place. After that, I did not want to send my children to school. And first time my children went back to school, I sat in front of school's gate for the entire time. And my wife asked, they'll be with weapons, what can you do? I said, before somebody reaches my child, at least I can die. So in that state of affairs, somebody who stood up and took charge and actually took responsibility, and then his message, welcome back to school, I thought that actually resonated with me.
Exactly.
Most of the people will not agree with me, I understand, because usually it is easy to forgive your oppressor. It is very difficult to forgive your victim, right? And many people at that time, because he was getting very popular, especially in media, many people kept on criticizing him because of that. But I haven't seen anything wrong being done by the man. So I would actually say that whosoever comes, there should be a finite window of time where they serve their role, and then they can leave.
Right, absolutely, and that's extremely important. And Rana Sahab, we will continue the discussion moving forward as to what exactly are the considerations and factors, given, of course, the kind of trajectory that we're looking at, especially in terms of the political and economic challenges. But before that, Khurram Sahab, if you can also shed light on the way that the caretaker setup, of course, now has been empowered more than previously, is going to be able to handle the kind of challenges that are there, and how those powers will allow that to actually be something that is beneficial for the country, and then also in terms of the conduct of the next general elections.
Yes, I think that this is an important issue to talk about. Like what we have seen over our previous couple of months, there has been heavy legislation in the parliament, and the legislation was done set up to take key decisions. And then we saw the IMF deal being signed in just a few weeks back, and then we know that we have to pay a lot of debts in the upcoming months. And then we saw that there was a special investment facilitation council was created with the support of Pakistan military. So and then we see that, and we know various ministers have talked about this, that elections are not going to be held in 90 days, and there will be delimitation, and then only then can elections take place. So what we know is that this can take like at least 4 or 5 months, if not 6 months, and then there are talks that the elections may be delayed until next 1 year, or I mean to no limit. We don't know actually. So in these circumstances, this is the most serious subject to talk about, that what challenges this caretaker setup will have and how will they meet it. I think the way we are looking at the situation, and the way things are moving towards the creation of this caretaker setup, the way military establishment is involved in it, and the way deliberation are being made, I think they are going to choose very professional people, technocrat people who are expert in their fields, and I think they will make a setup which will be able to meet all these challenges, especially to deal with IMF, especially to take along this investment thing. When the foreign investment, we are seeing that there are some pledges by some friendly countries for investment, and this SIFC has just created, and it has started just functioning. Just today, the Vice Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia met Army Chief and met other senior officials, and he discussed investments in Pakistan. So I think whatever setup will come, it will be able to deal with this situation, and it will be empowered to deal with this situation, and it will have full military support, supported by the Chief of Army Staff, and I think it will be able to run things, and it will take us towards the end of its term successfully, and we will move forward towards election in a successful manner. But having said this, as I said earlier, we don't know when the election will be held. So we are not clear on it. We don't know what authorities are thinking about it. We don't know what the decision makers have made their decision about the election date. So until and unless the situation is not clear about the final election date, then there are clouds and there are shadows. So we can't be sure about anything. Yes, we can say that the setup will be empowered enough, will be able enough to deal the situation, but we don't know about the election date, and that is
Khurram, you talked about the decision makers deciding. Who exactly were you talking about? Just a clarification.
He mentioned
The decision makers with regards to the elections. Who exactly are they?
Establishment.
The decision makers. By decision makers, I mean I should be clear in saying that, of course, the military establishment, which is backing everything, which is behind everything, and of course, the election commission will have its role, and of course, the outgoing government, its supreme leader and other leaders. So they all must have made their minds. So, but the thing is that we don't know. We are not clear. So until and unless we are not clear, we are not clear to say anything.
All Right, sure. Rana Saab, I'd like your take on a few things which were discussed earlier. First, of course, with reference to the kind of names that have been floated around and discussed both by Farrukh and Faisal, and whether or not these names are, of course, part of the consideration and are something that perhaps leaders of the PMLN are looking towards as a possibility or hoping for that. And secondly, also in terms of the conduct of the general elections and the caretaker setup, there is, of course, a lot of onus that is being placed on the Election Commission of Pakistan. Of course, they have the responsibility for the conduct of the general elections, but Khurram, of course, earlier was referring to the role of the military establishment in the actual decision making of when and how that is going to be. Do you think that's the case, and how exactly is that being navigated?
I wanted to talk on this Raheel case issue. If you permit me to talk on that.
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes. So, Sana, it was really strange for me. The possibility of Raheel Sharif being appointed as the caretaker prime minister is absolutely ruled out. Reason being, the role he played once he was the army chief, and more so as DGISI, maybe Hairul Islam, the way they kicked off the system. Do you remember what happened? And my leadership will be the last person, even if the Arabian rulers say that Mr. Raheel Sharif should be appointed, it's all ruled out absolutely out of question, because his role cannot be applauded and admired. Once my friend Patapi has said that he played a role in quelling terrorism. So why did so much of terrorism take place in his tenure? Where were his intelligence agencies? Why didn't he collect the advanced intelligence? Why didn't he approach in advance? We have to professionally analyze. These are very big questions. If these people were ganging up and they killed about 200 innocent children, and afterwards some operation has been carried out after so much of loss, that speaks volumes for our level of lack of grip and lack of expertise to address this predicament in advance. We should have prevented this. It is always analyzed in case of the professionals that what type of preventive capability and preventive genius do they possess. So, okay, he might have done something, but in politics, the way he meddled in politics and his subordinates meddled in politics, and they really destabilized the whole system back in 2014, and leader of the would-be leader like Imran Khan was supported by them right, left, and center in a very indiscriminate manner. So I may very humbly try to inform this august house, the gentlemen who are sitting there, and Sana, you being the in charge and the coordinator, I may clarify it cannot happen at all.
Okay. Okay, yes, Farrukh, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I don't want to come ahead and looking like somebody who is actually rooting for somebody, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, let me give you an example or a name that I might have rooted for, right? And that should clarify what kind of leaders I'm looking for. And that is Dr. Adil Najm, or people like him, who are intellectuals, who are internationally accomplished, could have actually been the best fit for such a transitory position. So that means that I'm not essentially endorsing or qualifying any of the people who are there. But regarding General Raheel Sharif, I just wanted to clarify, and this is because a lot of trauma was generated during those days, right? If you remember, because as Tanasa pointed out, 2014 took place, but there's a reason why 2014 Dharna actually failed. And I think that is primarily because of that army chief's refusal to go along with the people who were trying to stir that pot, right? And frankly, because he comes from a family that had two Nishan Haider in the family, so I never thought that he would actually go for any kind of military takeover. And that's why I kept on thinking that had he actually continued in his position 3 months later, 3 years later, would have been given an extension. Mian Nawaz Sharif perhaps would be ruling the country even then. Why? because then came somebody else. General Bajwa from start was actually attacked by people on the assumptions about his faith and weakened terribly. And after that, this bit about why we see terrorism now, I think that when General Rahil Sharif left, at that time they had actually done incredibly well of diminishing terrorism. But then General Bajwa had to reinvent the wheel. He went for, instead of Zarb-e-Azab, he went for Raddul Fasad, which became a very different kind of ball game. And in the end, while he was going or leaving, at that time there were deals with TTP that actually totally sunk the whole boat, right? So I don't think that we can actually hold General Rahil Sharif responsible. I was dismayed by his decision to go abroad and join another army or lead it. I would have thought, I'm a possessive man, I would have liked my Pakistanis to stay totally dedicated to Pakistan. But having said that, I don't think that in this grapevine we see people or we give people the credit they need. I understand that during his time there was a DGISI who was actually accused of many things, and because that circumstances became very complicated. But had General Rahil Sharif not been there, circumstances would have been very different already. And I think that this decision to not give extension to Rahil Sharif but give extension to General Bajwa actually misfired royally. Because on one side you had somebody who could actually do some good, and then somebody who could not, and you gave extension. And by the way, when General Bajwa was given extension, all political parties, including PMLN, actually voted for his extension.
Right, and Faisal, I'll come to you and you can add to that something that I believe you want to. But in terms of what was earlier talked about, it seems that Rana Saab has very confidently said no to what you were earlier reporting, which of course means that perhaps we need to get more into where exactly you're coming from and whether or not you still want to defend that and add to that as well. But also the aspect of the civil military leadership is of course very important to the political dynamics of the country historically speaking, and also of course has led to much controversy. But I want to now know, given where we stand today till the time that we have the general elections, how will this particular dynamic pan out in terms of its influence on the way that the caretaker setup will move ahead, and of course the conduct of general elections, and how will this then move towards a direction that we are hoping for from the military establishment in terms of the kind of strengthening of democracy that we're looking for?
Sana, we have been talking about why this interim setup is going to be a sort of a very empowered interim setup. We have talked about it because we are faced with the economic challenges, we are faced with obviously political challenges, internal political challenges of the country, and of course there are lots of things which are going on geopolitically, I'm speaking, and of course we have to have people who are well equipped to deal with that. When it comes to economy, obviously we have been talking about that the interim setup would be economic centric, and we have talked about Hafiz Sheikh might be the Prime Minister. In past we have been talking about it. But now, of course, we have other geopolitical challenges as well. We know that Ukraine crisis is there. Then, of course, we know India is playing lots of games in the region. Then we know that on the Western Front, of course, we have a very a border where constantly we're getting terrorism from. Obviously, I'm talking about the Nangarhar province and Kunar province. There are lots of things which need to be looked
not
into.
only provinces, they are a country that is called Afghanistan.
Afghanistan.
You can name the country.
Yeah,
you can
Afghanistan.
name their rulers as well. That
Exactly.
is Taliban.
Taliban.
Who are actually propping up all the terrorists against them.
They are the ones who are doing it.
Yeah, thank you.
And of course, we know that lots is happening about China as well. So in all of these things, we have to have people who know the best how to maneuver the things in coming future. Of course, everything would be on autopilot, but like we said earlier, that with the autopilot, we have to have the pilots as well. So the pilots should be the ones who know how the autopilot should work. And if it is not working, of course, they need to make sure that it does work properly. And earlier, of course, I took the name of General Raheel Sharif. The only reason behind it was we are journalists. We meet people every day. We sit with the people, and of course, whatever we see, whatever we hear from other people, we sort of create a perception, and we talk about it later on. That's what happened. I mean, I did come across his name. I did come across the way, obviously, Farrukh highlighted the same things. It's been highlighted in front of me from somebody else as well, that of course he's someone who played a pivotal role when it comes to war against terrorism, and that is quite important. And knowing the fact that he has been very close to royal family of Saudi Arabia, and we know that in coming future we are expecting obviously heavy investments from Saudi Arabia as well, and we know that friends of Pakistan from the Gulf countries, they have been very crucial when it comes to we saving our economy.
Right.
So all of these things
very humbly
will be
wanted
taken into account.
I very humbly wanted to request you to actually move on, because we have spent incredible amount of time on one nomination. We don't know anything.
Yeah,
He might
that's a
not
very
even be a
important
candidate, as Rana Sahab was saying.
Absolutely.
And I think that the most important thing that Rana Sahab actually said earlier, that that resonates with most of us. The whole idea of a caretaker setup is passé. It is something that doesn't deliver, because nobody in the end accepts the results if they lose elections.
Yeah.
So there's no point in having such a government that doesn't have power, which is there for only very limited time, which is not elected, and usually where you actually select people who are on basically cognitive decline, because then they cannot do much damage.
Right, absolutely. Khurram Saab, with reference to, of course, the new census results and the new delimitations, of course, we're talking about an eventual delay that we're seeing, and I understand what you said in terms of how far it's going to go ahead. But we can, of course, have an estimation in terms of the challenge that it is and the timeline that can possibly be there. And I know that 3 to 4 months additional are being counted in. But I want to know whether or not there is going to be an approach by perhaps the ECP or the caretaker setup or the different political parties that can actually lead to some sort of certainty to this direction, where we can hopefully see perhaps a sort of deadline, and there is a consensus by including the military establishment that this will not be exceeded beyond that.
Yes, I think that to bring certainty in the country and stabilization in the country, first of all, the Prime Minister and opposition leader should announce the name of the caretaker Prime Minister as soon as possible. And as a next step, Election Commission of Pakistan should step ahead, and they should announce delimitation of constituencies and should complete it as soon as possible. And then they should announce election date, and then process towards electioneering should start, and things should go in a positive manner. And then, of course, we should see a statement by the military establishment and the military chief encouraging the democratic process, and all these stakeholders and all these national institutions should come forward and create an environment in which we can see that the election process should go forward, and we should have an election date as soon as possible. That will surely bring the certainty and stabilization in the country.
Right, absolutely. And Rana Sahab, last question with reference to what is going on. There is, of course, the talk of March 2024, but I want to know what efforts can be made by political parties such as yours towards ensuring that that actually does happen.
Actually, I personally think I've been talking to people, my political strata as well. There is a realization that if the elections are delayed, that will be further harming the parties, especially Muslim League N. And all the parties put together, they're eager to have elections as early as possible. If at all, due to certain compulsion, as the census notification, etc., and constitutional provision to have election on the basis of new list, that is the compulsion. But it will not be getting delayed to the extent that it crosses February or the first week of March, because maybe a little before March, but 12th March is election for the Senate. So electoral college Senate are the provincial assembly. They have to hold the election in the provincial assembly before March.
Right. So, right, but what sort of guarantee? Is that a guarantee that it will be in March then? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, it has to be, because they can't cross the state and they can't dilute the Senate. There's no sense in it. And of course, there's a consensus, and the political party full pressure from
Right, absolutely. Absolutely, Rana Saab. Thank you very much, Rana Maqbool Saab, for joining us and being part of the discussion. Thank you, Khurram Shahzad Saab, for also being part of the debate, and of course to Farrukh and Faisal for also being part of the discussion as well. There is, of course, a lot that remains to be seen in terms of how exactly the caretaker setup will be decided, the kind of consensus that actually will possibly exist now. We've had one round of talks between the officiating Prime Minister and the opposition leader, and there's another one tomorrow, and we're hoping, of course, that there is some sort of certainty that we can see in a consensus moving forward, so that there is a smooth transition and that eventually we can proceed towards the kind of challenges the country has to face and the elections, of course. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll now see you tomorrow.